Propain's Hugene won our 2020 Trail Bike of the Year test with excellent performance in virtually every situation. In 2021, Propain have updated the bike with a whole new frame which follows all the trends you'd expect from a bike. It's longer, it's slacker, and it's still excellent value for money. Now, while it didn't win the test this year, it came a very respectable second. The Hugene is still an incredible trail bike in my opinion. The travel at the back has been up to 140mm, matching that at the front of my test bike. The suspension is impeccably smooth with a glued down feel that delivers tons of traction. At the same time though, it's reactive and agile, happily darting from one corner to the next. This makes it huge amounts of fun to ride. We were impressed last year with the ability to alter the spec through their online bike builder, and this year that feature still exists. This makes it ideal for riders who know what they want, whether it's drivetrain, tyres or suspension. This particular bike did come in over our usual price point, but I'll go more into depth on that later on. Before I continue with the Hugene's review, I'll give you a bit of context to this year's Trail Bike of the Year test, which contained 8 bikes. You might have noticed in the news some global events that have impacted on bike availability, and this did make getting hold of bikes fairly tricky. Usually there's a £3,000 to £3,500 price limit, and that's what I wanted to do this year. However, as time went on, I had to relax that a little bit to make sure I got some bikes. Likewise, the impact of Brexit wasn't clear until the new year, and again this impacted on the price of the bikes. When this happened, my reviews focused on the frame more than the kit, and I endeavoured to comment on models of the bike which either hit the price point but I couldn't get, or gave other options within the range. It's not an ideal situation, but neither is a global pandemic, and neither is the politics of Brexit. I'd also like to give a big thanks to Bike Park Wales. Testing has been trickier this year thanks to travel and group ride restrictions. And so Bike Park Wales' kind offer to let us use their tracks for work purposes whilst they were closed was really appreciated. Needless to say, with no uplift, this year I've pedalled up a lot of hills during my testing. This year the Hugene grows from a 130mm trail bike to a 140mm bike to better balance the 140 or 150mm suspension delivered by the fork. By balancing the travel, the Hugene should be easier to set up with a consistent feel between the wheels and gives the bike a bit more give at the back when you hit bigger bumps. Within the frame's architecture, Propain has squeezed in a longer stroke shock, which means lower stresses through the frame and linkages and shock, and should make it a touch easier to set up too. The bike's kinematic, as defined by their Pro 10 linkage, has been designed to keep anti-squat high enough for effective pedalling characteristics, while the progression through the stroke should give small bump sensitivity and composure through bigger impacts. In addition to the additional travel as one expects, the geometry gets longer, slacker and lower, with a lighter weight to boot. Propain has been careful though to ensure the frame's stiffness is still on point, and the frame silhouette has straighter lines to reduce stresses. When it comes to geometry, we're seeing a steeper 76.5 degree seat angle and a slacker 65.5 degree head angle with a 140mm fork. With a 150mm fork, because that front end is held a little bit higher, knock half a degree off for each of those figures. These figures aren't the most extreme in the test. In many respects, they represent fairly average numbers for bike geometry in 2021. The rest of the geometry chart for a size large sees a 480mm reach, 445mm chainstays and a 1242mm wheelbase, again with a 140mm fork. The reach is bang on for the money, and while we've seen shorter stays, the rear end length should add to the bike's high speed stability. Check out the link in the description for a first full look at the new Hugene. During the organisation for this test, I made a communication error, and sadly this version of the Hugene came in well above our theoretical limit of £3,500. With the bikes shipping from the EU, pricing is a little trickier than usual also. In theory, the price to the UK is £4,284.90 plus import duties. However, Propain mentioned that at least in early 2021, some customers weren't being charged import duties. What this means though, really, if you choose to purchase a bike from Propain or any other EU brand with a bike being shipped to the UK, do be aware of the potential for an extra import duty to be added. The brands themselves are not necessarily responsible for adding this cost at the checkout, so do your research. However, Propain are one of a growing number of companies who are able to adjust the specification of the bike depending on your preference or budget. The Hugene range starts at €3,300 with a spec that includes a 140mm RockShox Pike Select fork, a SRAM GX Eagle drivetrain, SRAM G2R brakes, a pair of wheels featuring Stan ZTR Flow S1 rims and sticky Schwalbe tyres. This is a very similar spec to a number of the other bikes in our 2021 Trail Bike of the Year test, and in our opinion, looks to retain Propain's good value for money. My bike came with a Fox 34 Performance Elite fork and a DPX2 shock, a SRAM X01 drivetrain and carbon descendant crank, Newman wheels with Schwalbe Big Betty and Magic Mary tyres, and finishing kit from German brand Sixpack. Due to the pricing error on my part, this review is largely based around the performance of the frame. I will touch upon the componentry too, however bearing in mind the extra cost when doing so. If you're looking for a real all-rounder, then Propain's new Hugene ticks an awful lot of boxes. It's the new version of the bike that won last year's Trail Bike of the Year test, and while it didn't quite win this year, coming in second, I reckon they've made a great bike even better. If all-round competence is important, then the Hugene simply gets on with the job with minimal fuss. The shape really works, in my opinion, with a length that's long enough to give plenty of stability when trails get steep and loose. Certainly the 445mm stays at the back contribute towards that. Nose it into a steep section of trail and the Hugene is more than happy to let you get off the brakes, pick up some speed and grip the bars. The rear wheel hugs the ground, tracking every lump and bump with the minimal of fuss, whether large or small, and whether you're freewheeling or absolutely hanging off the brakes. With the rear wheel so happily stuck to the floor, braking traction is really good, especially on steep terrain, regardless of how choppy the ground gets. I also found the Hugene to be almost silent. Their new chainstay protector seems to work flawlessly, reducing chain slap to an absolute minimum. It's kind of weird jumping on other bikes after riding the Hugene, as they all start to sound like a bag of spanners, and that's a feature I really like. When it comes to corners, the Hugene is no slouch either, with a ton of personality thrown in. It's an agile, playful bike that encourages you to tip it from side to side, slaloming through the trees or laying it flat through a berm, where the Schwalbe Magic Mary at the front and Big Betty at the back hook into the dirt and deliver you to the exit barely breaking a sweat. All this agility is despite the 445mm chainstays, which naturally lend themselves to plenty of stability and calmness. Propain does seem to have built a bike that can be both stable and snappy at the same time. I also never found it an issue lifting the front wheel or bunny hopping over trail obstacles. If and when you do get the Hugene to brake traction, it's very controllable, with little in the way of ridiculous oversteer that throws you off the bike. You're probably not going to start high-siding on this one. This was the first I'd ridden with the new Schwalbe Big Betty at the rear, and I came away impressed with their high-volume, aggressively treaded tyre. There are faster rollers out there, but it certainly didn't feel like I was dragging an anchor along. Climbing, braking and cornering traction all seemed to match what I was expecting from a high-volume trail tyre. Pedalling the Hugene is a composed affair, with seated climbing showing nothing in the way of noticeable pedal bob, despite the rear wheel rarely spitting out dirt behind it. The seating position is comfortable too, with a roomy front end that doesn't feel cramped and allows you to move over the top of the bike maintaining traction. Under bursts of power there's a touch of lag, partly thanks to those grippy tyres maybe, but also perhaps down to a touch of bob when you really mash on the pedals. I only really noticed this on flat, pedally trail centre straights, where I was stood on the pedals putting all my effort through the rear suspension. While the bike I tested did come in above the usual Trail Bike of the Year budget, having looked at the specs, either stock or custom, available for a price more in line with other bikes in the test, I'm confident that the Hugene would still have scored as high as it has here. The basis of this bike's performance really does come from its frame, which is a constant regardless of how much you spend on it. What do you think of Propain's latest Hugene? Is it a bike on your shortlist? Let me know in the comments. As usual, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you get a notification every time we upload a new video.